Welcome to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. Hi, everybody. Look, we think that cartoons are only for kids. We take our kids to see Disney and Pixar films, confident that the animated stories will provide the necessary filter from the outside world that our kids need and deserve. But when we look a little deeper into many of the animated films we grew up watching, and even some of the ones we're raising our children on, we see things differently. Dr. Seuss and his works have been trending in the news lately. But he didn't start or finish the perpetuation of racist images in books or animated films. Cartoons have always been, and to this day continue to be, used for political and racist propaganda. Tonight, the business of being Black is digging into racist cartoons. So I have to ask, why should Black people care about racist cartoons?
So first I'll say I work on actually comic strips and comic books and cartoon art. So I work with the things that happened before things are animated. And one of the things that we should remember is that when people were colonizing and when people were trying to defend slavery, part of what they did is they would circulate these negative representations of Black people, and that would serve a narrative of Black people being less than human. So when there were cartoons, say, of Sarah Bartman, the Hottentot Venus, as I'm sure some of your audience might know, who was on displays from the 19th century, part of it was to say, see how different she is, and she's probably even descended in a different way than we are as human beings, which serve scientific racism. So there's this long history of representations to justify racism by telling a joke that people shouldn't take seriously about what Black people are like. But I might mess with your heads a little bit this evening, because one of the things that's interesting to me is actually sometimes African-American cartoonists, and we can see this with African-American comedians and other aspects of humor, might use caricature and stereotype to make commentaries themselves. So it's interesting to get into that as well.
Absolutely. Aramide, why should Black folk care? Why should we care that a cartoon has racist undertones or overtures?
I think one thing that I'm noticing, especially in media and film and entertainment specifically, is that if we don't learn from our past, we're doomed to repeat it. So right now you're hearing conversations about racism on shows like The Bachelor and things of that nature, or you're having some place like Disney Plus snatch down certain images or films from their platform because they don't want to be seen as racist and things of that nature. But these things happen, and we have to educate ourselves about it. We have to educate the next generation, because we're absorbing these images as you and I did as children, and we're loving on Dumbo and Jim Crow, the Crow, and all of these different things. But we're not realizing the racial undertones. It was very revelatory for me, as a cinema studies student, when I'm looking at these images again, in my teens, 20s, and so forth. And I'm like, I never realized how racist and how horrible these images were. We just accept them. We are sort of so embedded in our culture and in the racist fabric of America that we accept things that we don't know what we're looking at.
Yeah. I want to go back to Dr. Pilgrim. You talked about the 1941 cartoon Scrub Me Mama with a Boogie Beat. There is almost too much racist imagery to wrap your head around. Of course, as you mentioned, the cartoon takes place in an area called Lazy Town, which consists entirely of Black people, most of whom have lips that take up half of their faces. Everyone's lazily lying around until a woman comes and shows them how to properly wash their clothing, at which point everyone gets excited and starts dancing. So since you brought that up, let's take a look at a clip from Scrub Me Mama with a Boogie Beat.
There ain't no way to wash clothes. What you all need is rhythm.
What do you all mean, rhythm?
I'll show you what I mean. In Harlem, there's a little place where everyone goes to see the way a washerwoman washes her clothes. If you like boogie woogie rhythm, she's gotta be.
Wow. Wow. What was the point of that cartoon? And I think what I really want to ask is, and I'm just going to be very transparent here. I am a huge fan of cartoons. And even though some of them are racist, as Black people, we do still find them quite humorous. When you look at the little girl in the video with the pigtails and the bows and then the big red lips, and you hear this manly voice coming out of the black woman with the big lips scrubbing the washboard, is that funny or is it not funny? And I'll go to you. Go ahead.
I appreciate it. And also I appreciate the cue. It's almost like we did that on purpose. That was awesome. First of all, I believe something can be funny and offensive. I don't think those are mutually exclusive categories. And the excuse that that something is funny, therefore it's not racist, doesn't make sense to me. The fact of the matter is, white folks have been laughing at Black people almost from the beginning. I did want to say though that it shouldn't surprise us that cartoons like that one were created when they were created, because if you look at the United States at that time during the Jim Crow period, you could have read in newspapers racial slurs as just matter-of-fact descriptors of Black people. You know, from our church pews, from in our college classrooms, everything in the society was designed. Every major social institution in society was designed to perpetuate a system that had whites at the top and Blacks on the bottom. And so it wouldn't surprise us, shouldn't surprise us, that we see that in animation. And I've always said that toys, games, and animation are the sneakiest, most pernicious ways to spread racist propaganda.
I've always thought Mr. Potato Head was quite, you know, I'm side-eyeing Mr. Potato Head, because I'm like, it's, you know, it's the color of Black people with the big red lips and these big old white gloves on. Like, I'm like, I don't know about Mr. Potato Head, but now they're saying there is no Mr. Potato Head. They're just going to call it Potato Head because they want it to be genderless. So Professor Wanzo, can I laugh at that or no?
Well, I mean, one of the things I think is funny, the thing that's the most important there, I think it's about the fact that it swings. I think it's about the music. So you mentioned the lips and the gloves. Well, that goes back to minstrelsy, right? Yeah. So we have to understand that the foundation of American music is minstrelsy, blackface. So you go from minstrelsy to vaudeville, straight into these cartoons, right? So a lot of these cartoons, Mickey Mouse, for example, my colleague Nick Salmon wrote a book called Birth of an Industry about Mickey Mouse and its relationship to minstrelsy. Part of what you see in these cartoons is the legacy of American music and the racism embedded in it.
Interesting you say the legacy of American music, because this particular cartoon that we showed a clip of, and Aramide, I want to talk to you about this. What's ironic and funny about the clip to me is that here's this white woman teaching Black people how to have rhythm.
Definitely. And I think it just goes back to how institutionalized racism is and was at that period of time. You're looking at something where they're trying to sort of perpetuate these type of stereotypes onto people, into their children, into future generations. So what I think that is amusing about it is how ridiculous is. And I think as much as you can laugh at it, you also have to learn from it, like how volatile white supremacy is. They would start conditioning children to believe these images and to think certain things about themselves, and how sort of absurd some white people are when it comes to elevating themselves. Well, we all know, you know, who really were the domestic workers in these homes, who really were washing clothes and doing all of these things. It's like a lie that white America continues to tell themselves. And like Dr. Pilgrim said, it's through everything. It's through our newspapers. It's through, you know, the cookie thing that we see on our grandmother's counter. It's so embedded into our culture, which is why it's taken so long to chip and chip and chip away.
We're going to chip away at some commercials right now and come right back on the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. Welcome back to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. Tonight, we are the business of being Black are racist cartoons. All right, so let's get down to this. According to the BBC, on the Disney Plus streaming service, when certain classic Disney films are played, including Dumbo, Peter Pan, and The Jungle Book, A new content advisory notice appears on the screen at the beginning of the movie. That warning reads, "This program includes negative depictions and or mistreatment of people or cultures. These stereotypes were wrong then and are wrong now. We want to acknowledge its harmful impact, learn from it, and spark conversation to create a more inclusive future together." Is this good enough? Does this work, Professor Wanzo?
I think that it's good to have those warnings. I don't know if you followed last year with Gone with the Wind and how they took it off for a minute. And then Jackie Stewart, professor at film at the University of Chicago, who now has a new television show that's talking about sort of our problematic faves, right? And negative representations, did an intro to Gone with the Wind. And I think that it's really hard to remove or scrub from US culture everything that was racist, because that's almost
America.
So part of what we need to do is teach people to be better at reading things and interpreting things, even when they're children, and for people to have conversations with their children about media. I mean, I know like Megyn Kelly and Bill Maher said like, oh, it's our children shouldn't have to worry about racism. Well, and it's good that her children don't have to worry about racism. But I think you could start teaching media literacy to children very young, and this might be a way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. Dr. Pilgrim.
Yeah, this one's, I don't want to sound like a hypocrite. So on the one hand, I would just as well, we didn't have racist imagery in our society. I certainly appreciate the fact that they're trying to contextualize it. The idea that they're trying to create an environment of conversation rings a little hollow to me, but I believe those conversations are possible, and that's why we have the Jim Crow Museum. So the reason I say I don't want to be a hypocrite is because, you know, we actually are taking the objects that other people are destroying, and we'll put them in an environment where we actually can have those discussions. Because we believe that, for example, that if you put them all in a room, among other things you learn is about the resiliency of African-American people despite all of the harm that was done in our direction.
But honestly, do you think other cultures will see our resilience, or will they see the big red lips and the white minstrel show gloves?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about other cultures, and quite frankly, unless it's done right, this culture, they're going to see the caricatures. We have a showcase before you enter the museum where we take postcards, and the one postcard is a realistic image of an African American, and we place it next to a caricatured image. And to the spirit of your question, most visitors, they see the caricature because the caricatures dominate the realistic depictions of African Americans. And so regrettably, I'll have to say that you're right, that without a lot of work, most people are going to see the caricature.
Yeah, there are a couple of television shows, cartoons that have decided to remove certain parts of that particular project that seem to be offensive or racist out of the entire the entire project. And here I go again, because I was raised on some of these cartoons. So here I go again, Aramide. When we talk about Dumbo, the best scene in Dumbo to me are the Jim Crows.
Yes.
Like the song is, I mean, the whole song kind of solidifies Dumbo and what positivity comes to him having these big ears. You know, you should fly, and you would never see an elephant fly. You know, I mean, the song itself is catchy. It's got rhythm, you know, and yeah, of course, there's a white man who actually voices Jim Crow. That's no good either. But I would hate for that scene to be taken out of Dumbo, because that particular scene makes Dumbo make sense. Am I making any sense, Aramide?
Yeah. You're absolutely making a ton of sense. And I, for one, think that this disclaimer that Disney Plus is putting in front of their films is just not enough. I think that removing certain scenes from certain films is just not enough. I think they're Disney and they have the bandwidth and the wealth to create and curate materials for children so they can understand why these images were placed, mostly, you know, at the turn of the 20th century or and then after World War II, why these images were placed in their favorite and beloved and classic cartoons, and what we can learn from it. So, you know, a little kid, you put your 6, 7, 8-year-old in front of a cartoon, they don't really understand Jim Crow. They're not understanding sort of the significance of these people with huge lips and this racist imagery. But if we have a talk back or we have someone splicing in to interact with them, that is where the learning can begin. The average parent, no matter what color, probably doesn't have time to sit there and, you know, educate their child the way they even might want to. So I think this is just a Band-Aid for Disney, and they could be doing so much more. I know they've snatched down Song of the South. Obviously, it's extremely problematic, but I don't think that's necessarily
I had a
solution.
problem with them taking down Song of the South because, number one, there was a Black man who literally won an Oscar for Song of the South. And so I think that much light needs to shine on him and his contributions to animation, his contributions to film. If we're talking about Song of the South, I mean, I think just like if we're talking about Gone with the Wind, we cannot neglect that there was a Black woman who won an Oscar. So I have a problem with it because some of it takes away some of our historical contributions to America. And I think that that knowledge has to be known. It has to be recognized. But also, I believe, in addition to what you suggested, Aramide, I also think that what Disney, what Pixar, what these people need to do are to hire Black animators, hire Black storytellers, and have new classic films. I know Dumbo and Peter Pan is a classic, but it's not a classic to people who were born in 2020. It's not a classic to people who were born in 2010. And so new classics and new traditions can be created when we talk about these animations and these cartoons. There certainly can be a whole new crew. And just because we're attached to it and we have this nostalgic feeling about it, doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's good for America either. Professor Wanzo, you want to speak?
Well, I just want to say, I mean, I was trying to figure out if you were saying that we should remove these films, and I'm glad to hear you're not saying we should, because that is often eliminating not just our media history, but the performances of Black folks, you know, as you said. So I agree with you. We can always have more, and Disney can do more, but I'm pretty firmly against saying like just yanking things, because I think that that causes just some of the conflicts that, you know, we just can't really move forward and teach people how to read things differently and to interpret things differently and recognize our history, right? And when you pull things that people love, they're gonna fight.
Well, look, yeah, we knew that when they started pulling the Confederate statues and they were gonna fight. But you know, some things do need to be pulled.
I don't think they all really love those though. They were just making that up.
Look, listen, we are going to take a commercial break and we're coming right back because we are talking racist cartoons tonight. And where do you stand on racist cartoons? Hit us up if you're watching on YouTube now, chat with us. We chat back. We're going to the chat room next on the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. Welcome back to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul, where we're talking about racist cartoons tonight. That's the business of being Black. I'm going to go to the chat room because we got a few chats here, but I did want to make some specific acknowledgments. We were talking about Song of the South, and we were talking about the hoorah for Song of the South was the actual song Zippity Doodah Zippity Day. That is the song that many saw problematic and saw racist. And also the fact that all of these slaves were kind of, you know, singing and dancing and carrying on as if this was the thing to do, and as if it was a zippity doodah zippity day. But what most people don't know about Song of the South and that particular song, Zippity Doodah Zippity Day, is that James Baskett was the first Black male performer to ever win an Oscar. And he was not allowed to compete to win an Oscar. He was actually given an honorary Academy Award. And so when we talk about taking the songs out of these cartoons or any other project like Gone with the Wind, which we talked about, Hattie McDaniel becomes the first woman, African-American woman, to win an Oscar for Gone with the Wind for playing Mammy, which, you know, many people found that problematic. And even then they found it problematic. And she said, look, I'd rather play a maid than be a maid. That was her stance on it. Let's go to our chat room. Richard Moonstone says there is nothing wrong with telling children that the treatment of a Black person is not being properly represented. That is not bringing racism to children. It's saying treat people with respect. Yeah, I think we all agree with that, Richard. Kim Johnson says, I agree 100% that just disclaimer are not enough for Disney or any other production place. They can remove the movies and start creating new positive ones that fit the time for equality. And then Hannibal says, I think we should leave it the way it is. The movie is the movie. I think we should get the choice to choose if you want to see a full version or the politically correct version. I never thought about that. There could be two different versions. Yeah. And then let's see. Oh, stop messing with history. Just leave it the way it was. And we don't all agree with what you want to change. Listen here. Stop messing with history and leave it the way it was. If that were the case, Dr. Pilgrim wouldn't be a doctor right now. Professor Wanzo wouldn't be a professor right now. Ramide would definitely not be a critic and entertainment reporter. I definitely wouldn't have my own television show right now on Fox Soul, and we'd all still be slaving. So do we really want to leave history, and not make changes? Don't go there with me today. Let's keep it to the cartoons. So some of these films that include that content warning are The Aristocrats, Lady and the Tramp, some of Disney's best known animated films. Should those titles be removed at all from circulation? Let's talk about what our viewers are talking about here. I know, Professor Wanzo, you said they shouldn't be removed. How do you feel about them being removed altogether, Dr. Pilgrim? Or should they be shelved in a library or like a museum such as you curate?
Yeah, like I said, this one's tough for me because I so detest racist imagery and the mocking and belittling of African Americans or other groups. But I do believe there's an educational purpose. I just don't think that happens a lot when they're just shown, like, for example, the 2 million people that are watching some of these on YouTube, most of them are not getting the context, if you would. I also want to mention that animators from Pixar came to the museum and spent a day with us when they were making Soul. And so we got a chance to talk about these racist caricatures. They knew a lot. They actually have a chief diversity officer there now. They're having these discussions at the time. But I thought it was fruitful that we had those conversations and maybe brought some sensitivity that they didn't have. Quite frankly, I think this idea of making news stories is great, but the people that are making the news stories, I believe, need to be having the same kind of conversations that we're challenging corporations and police departments to have.
Yes, good point. So since you talked about Soul, let's go there. Mike.com points out that The Princess and the Frog in 2009 featured Disney's first Black princess, Tiana, who was turned into a frog less than 30 minutes into the movie. And in 2020, the animated film Soul, Pixar's first Black lead character, gets turned into a cat less than 10 minutes into the movie. I'm not sure that those Soul creators learned very much at the Jim Crow Museum, Dr. Pilgrim. Why do animators continue to turn Black people and other people of color into animals, Ramide?
I think there's just a history of white people trying to tell Black stories. So if you know anything about Soul, it's co-directed, but the concept was from a white director, and he began the film and then brought in a Black director. So you'll see these beautiful images of Black people in the movie, like New York looks gorgeous, the texture of their hair and their skin looks beautiful. But again, this is a white woman voiced cat, Tina Fey's cat, inside of Jamie Foxx's body that you're watching. And it's just a kind of a waste of a movie, unfortunately. The soundtrack is beautiful. It had so much promise. But again, it's back to what Dr. Pilgrim said. Who is making these movies? You had something like Into the Spider-Verse with Miles Morales a couple of years ago, which is beautifully done. It's an Afro-Latino Spider-Man, and it's very different because from top to bottom you have Black director, Black animator, and I think we just have to stop allowing white people to tell our stories, or when they do, we have to go in and say, this is not cute, no one wants to hear Tina Fey's voice in Jamie Foxx's body. Who chose this? Why is this a thing? And so on top of that, really was really convoluted and strange. I'm not sure why it was directed towards children at all. It's a very odd story. And when you look at Pixar, who's done something like Inside Out, and they have the sensitivity to do something better, they just always miss the ball when it comes to telling our stories, and they need to do better.
Let's go to some of our soulmates here who are chiming in. Let's see. LaShandra says, as a parent, I can honestly say that you do have to see these types of cartoons so that way they are not blind to the racism in the world, but you have to teach them not to be racist. Is that true, Dr. Pilgrim? You have to let children see these, because you spoke at the beginning of the show about how you were watching this extremely racist cartoon, and your daughter was standing behind you and says, oh, those monkeys are funny. So is this okay for our children to see so that we can then sit them down and teach them better, or?
Well, I think people should start talking about race as soon as they learn words, but we need to get the right chronology of what to introduce them to. So for example, in the museum, we don't do tours for children. However, I respect the fact that some of my brothers and sisters, my generation and younger, want to bring their children in and introduce them. So again, it's tough to figure out what can you give to a child in terms of knowledge, what conversations you should have. But I believe they should be talking about race and racism, just not certain at what point you introduce a specific cartoon or an imagery.
Are we being a little too sensitive here? There have been cartoons where white characters have been turned into animals. Are we being a little too sensitive here? Let's take a look. I got a quick clip of Soul. Let's take a look at this again. Well, I thought I had a quick clip of Soul. Maybe not so much. Okay, maybe not so much. I thought we had a clip of Soul there. So we'll move on. Let's move on to Dr. Seuss. Yeah. It's a clip of The Princess and the Frog. My bad. Okay. Same difference. A black person turns into an animal. Let's take a clip of Princess and the Frog.
And how'd I get way down here and all this?
It's interesting because really, in The Princess and the Frog, I feel like it's the prince, or is it the Prince and the Frog, where the prince, who is it that kisses the frog and the frog turns into a beautiful white man? That's a prince. There's something where they kiss, the woman kisses the frog and the frog turns into the prince. Mm-hmm. In this particular case, the princess turns into a frog. It's quite interesting, but are we being sensitive here? It's a cartoon, for crying out loud, Professor Wanzo.
I think it's about sensitivity, but again, to throw a little wrench in this, I think the issue is that people don't agree. Like, people were fighting on my Facebook thread about Soul. Like, some Black folks liked it, some people didn't. And then we're erasing the Black man's labor as if he couldn't do something. And let's go, Princess and the Frog. There was no way it was going to work. It was an African-American princess story, right? So first she had a different name, and they're like, oh, that it was Minnie, or it was something that was too close to Mammy, and then they changed it. And then people talk about the way girls' bodies look in princess narratives, and so you take that out of it, but then she's not represented, and so then that's a problem. And then you try to make her hardworking to express the African-American work ethic, and she's like the only princess who has a job and a poor husband at the end of the film. So, I just think even the new things, Moana was collapsing different kinds of indigenous narratives, like in that film. Frozen, dealing stuff with indigenous people, they messed that up. There were some things that were problem there. The Frozen 2 was particularly whack. You've just got all kinds of things in each new thing. Let's not get rid of things that have problems, because really the foundation of American culture is racist and sexist and homophobic. It's almost our entire culture to like 1960 at least. And then it keeps creeping with the occasional good things. So, I just don't think pulling it's pulling culture, and a lot of which Black folks actually like. So, and just because Black people produce it doesn't mean there's not going to be caricature. And Tyler Perry, I went there, and I'll just say it, but I'll leave it there.
Well, what do you think about the PJs?
I think the PJs.
Excellent. And what do you think about Fat Albert?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, these are complex, and Black creators have done things that play with these representations. And so, there's a cartoonist, Sam Millay, Pittsburgh Courier, if he depicted Snick and Core as rats. He talked about people who were participating in urban uprising with like racist caricature because he thought that people should be more on the MLK tip, right? So we have these histories of representations in terms of people using things for various reasons that are complex. Like it's the history of cultural production in the US. So
the history of cultural production. Look, I have to say, I'm gonna put myself in a white person's place right now. Their heads have to be steaming. Like, I don't know what to do here. What can I do? I'm trying my best. I mean, you mean the princess can't work to show the Black people's work ethic? Oh wait, we can't use her name, and then what? I can imagine how crazy white people think we are for asking for more and more and more and more and more. And I'm sure that's what it sounds like. But it sounds like more and more and more because we were always given less and less and less. And so I want to make that absolutely clear. And I also want to say, like, I don't mind the PJs. I don't mind the Boondocks. I don't mind Fat Albert. When the creative is coming from our culture, it feels better to me. It feels more authentic. It feels more truthful. And it doesn't feel like there's an intention there to diminish us. Aramide, what are your thoughts?
I 100% agree. And I think the issue is, just as Professor Wanzo was saying, is that there's not enough, which is why we're fighting with each other over Soul. We're fighting with each other within the community over The Princess and the Frog, because she is the only princess that we have. So there's just a lack of representation, a lack of beautifully done projects. We, have a ton of dramas. We have a ton of all these other things, but Black people are still so underrepresented across all genres. So that's why we're constantly chopping at the bits and wanting, there's colorism and there's hair texture and there's just so much we want to discuss because people are desperate to see each other. I'm a millennial, but my mother was a boomer. She would go running to the front to see Black people on TV. And now we have Netflix and Hulu and all these different avenues, but we're so far behind. We're starved and we're thirsty to see ourselves and to see our cousins and our friends and our lovers in all of our colored, very textured, socioeconomic demographics. And I think that's really the core of the issue. It's really, we should have the Boondocks and the Proud Family. We should have all of these different.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Pilgrim, you want to get in before we get to break?
Well, I wanted to say, first of all, the Proud Family is my favorite cartoon. I find Boondocks brilliant at times. The PJs, I think, traffic in some caricatures and stereotypical behavior. But I love the point you just made, which is when we don't have much, then too much is expected of the opportunities that we do have. And it's probably not fair.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break and we'll come right back on the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul. Welcome back to the Tammi Mac Late Show on Fox Soul, where we are joined by the founder and curator of the Jim Crow Museum and the author of Haste to Rise, Dr. David Pilgrim, the chair of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Washington University in St. Louis, and the author of the content of our caricature, African American Comic Art and Political Belonging, Professor Rebecca Wanzo, and film critic and entertainment editor, Aramide Tinubu. Hello, everybody. Again, what a spirited conversation. We cannot continue this conversation without diving into Dr. Seuss and the drama that he has caused in these last few weeks in Congress. Dr. Seuss Enterprises announced this month that they would be removing 6 of Dr. Seuss's books from publication, including his first book. And to think I saw it on Mulberry Street because those books contain offensive caricatures of Asian people and Black people. A lot of Republican politicians, including Senator Ted Cruz and Representative Kevin McCarthy, have tried to use this move by Dr. Seuss Enterprises as an example of how the left is trying to take away their freedom. Many are going as far as to say incorrectly that Dr. Seuss has been canceled. Why are they so against these racist images being removed and not even prompted by anyone in Congress, let alone the left, but prompted by a new, I guess, a whole new generation and a movement that happened for an entire year across the world is why the Dr. Seuss Enterprises decided to make this change. Why can't some people see it as just trying to move in a more positive direction for America, Dr. Pilgrim?
Well, corporations have the right to be better. And in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, corporations, police departments, churches, schools, and others have had to ask themselves the question of what role does racism play in the society and in our lives? So the fact that they're having those discussions and coming up with new decisions and new approaches is great by me. If you're an activist, you take your victories where you can find them. And then I'll give you a parallel quickly, which is, imagine this is the 1940s and we're having little Black Sambo books being taught in our schools. I don't think there's anyone, and it took the NAACP and other groups to get that to change. I don't think there's anyone today who would suggest that we should be using little Black Sambo books as textbooks in our classrooms.
So you're saying in the 1940s, they actually used Sambo books that had Sambo in them.
And little Brown Cocoa and others, but the one most people would know would be Little Black Sambo.
Right.
And the American version of that was as caricatured, as racially caricatured as you could get. So my point is that it's like in the US, we keep having the same discussions all the time.
Yeah.
But this case is a little bit different in the sense that a company made the decision for themselves based on, now again, there were likely pressure, but they recognize they're living in a new society.
Professor Wanzo?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that irritates me is people constantly confuse market concerns with free speech. People will say that this is censorship of free speech, but it's actually a market concern and branding with relationship with the company. And, you know, the Little Black Sambo, my colleague Gerald Early collected a huge number of Little Black Sambo books. We have a collection at Washington University, and it's around the world. I mean, one of the problems with caricature is it's global. Black caricature is global. It hits, you know, every country. And you know, when people actually decide, okay, we're not going to reproduce it, there have actually been less racist versions of Little Black Sambo, believe it or not, that came out over the last few decades to try to actually do something a little better. But the reality is that people who produce children books have constantly pulled things off the market. And we just don't even notice. And I think actually if the Seuss Corporation hadn't announced it, we wouldn't even have noticed that they were gone because there's so many Seuss books.
Yeah. I mean, as long as the cat in the hat is there, I don't think we care. Aramide.
I definitely agree. I think one of the main things you have to understand is that the Seuss Corporation is Dr. Seuss's actual family. This is the man who was born in 1901. He died in 1991. Things have changed drastically over the course of his life and then in the 30 years since then. And what his family is doing is saying, you know, our patriarch or our person, he made some mistakes and we're going to look at the way the world is now and correct those things. I think that what Republicans and what the right seems to want to do is really hold on to their white supremacy, and they're holding on. We saw what they did in the past 4 years when there was a different president in office. And it's all of this, they don't want to wear masks. It goes back to all this, their freedoms, this and that. Most of the time, these people don't understand the Constitution. They're looking to better themselves and their family members and people who look like them while keeping their necks on underprivileged, underrepresented, and people of color. And I think that's just part of this huge cycle. They refuse to learn, they refuse to be better. So I think what Seuss is doing, I don't necessarily think they had to pull anything if they didn't want to, but I think if they think that that's what's best for their company, then why not? I don't believe in book banning or book burning or any of that sort of thing. But as you said, it is a private corporation who has the right to do what they want. And to say, like, we've learned from this, and Dr. Seuss has a huge, huge catalog of books that children can always look at and that we can look at. And if you want to go and find those books, then I'm sure people will find them at eBay and libraries and things of that sort. They're simply just not going to be reproduced. They're not being banished. They're not going anywhere.
I think it should be noted that later in life, Dr. Seuss, the author, went on to denounce anti-Black racism and anti-Semitism and express regret over some of his images that depicted Asians in a racist manner. So I think that should be noted.